April 15th, 2013, Boston, Massachusetts. It was supposed to be a day of joy. Thousands of runners from around the world had gathered for the Boston Marathon, one of the oldest and most famous races in America. Families lined the streets, children waved flags, strangers cheered for strangers. Near the finish line on Boylston Street, the air buzzed with excitement as the fastest runners approached. Music played from loudspeakers. Volunteers handed out water. People snapped selfies and shouted encouragement. And then, boom! A thunderous explosion tore through the crowd. A cloud of smoke and fire erupted near the metal barricades. People screamed. Runners stumbled. Flags toppled. 12 seconds later, boom! A second blast. Louder. Closer. More devastating. In an instant, the celebration turned into chaos. The street was littered with debris, shattered glass, torn clothing, twisted metal. People ran in every direction, searching for loved ones, fleeing the unknown danger. Others lay on the ground, injured and crying for help. A young boy, just 8 years old, was among the dead. More than 260 people were wounded, some losing limbs in the blasts. Police rushed toward the smoke. Paramedics tore down fences to reach the wounded. Ordinary bystanders became heroes, using belts as tourniquets and their jackets as bandages. No one knew who had done this. No one knew if more bombs were hidden in the crowd. But one thing was clear. This was an act of terror. And as the city of Boston struggled to understand what had just happened, 2 young men slipped quietly into the shadows. Brothers who had just changed the city and the country forever. Who were they? Why did they do it? And how would an entire nation hunt them down before they struck again? Months before that deadly day, life in Boston moved as usual, and no one, not even the people closest to them, suspected that 2 brothers living among them were plotting something horrifying. Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev were brothers, born in a region of Russia near Chechnya, a place that had seen years of conflict and war. They moved to the United States as children in the early 2000s, seeking a better life. They lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, went to local schools, and spoke English fluently. Friends described them as ordinary. Dzhokhar, the younger brother, was quiet, friendly, and popular at his high school. He even became a U.S. citizen in 2012. Tamerlan, the older brother, was more serious. He had been a promising amateur boxer, once dreaming of competing for the U.S. in the Olympics. But over the years, those dreams faded. By his mid-20s, Tamerlan had become frustrated and angry. He struggled to find steady work. He felt disconnected from the country he lived in. And he began spending more time online, watching extremist videos and reading violent propaganda. He started talking about how the U.S. was at war with Islam, ideas he had not expressed before. He became more controlling at home and more radical in his thinking. Dzhokhar noticed the change, but he looked up to his older brother. He trusted him. And slowly, Tamerlan's anger became their anger. The FBI later discovered that in 2012, Tamerlan had spent 6 months in Dagestan, a region known for extremist activity. They believe it was there that he deepened his radical views and possibly made contacts that would influence what came next. When he returned to the United States, Tamerlan was different. He was quiet and intense. And sometime after his return, he began talking about making a statement, about striking back. But he wasn't alone. His younger brother, still a teenager at the time, was listening. And soon, they began planning something together. The brothers decided to target the Boston Marathon, a symbol of freedom, endurance, and international unity. They knew the race attracted thousands of people, including runners and spectators from around the world. And they knew it would be difficult for security to cover every inch of the 26-mile course. Their plan was simple and horrifying. Build homemade bombs and place them near the finish line, where the largest crowds gathered. They studied online guides to make explosives. They bought pressure cookers, fireworks, and metal ball bearings. They packed the cookers with gunpowder and shrapnel, designed to tear through flesh and bone when detonated. The bombs were simple, cheap, and deadly. They hid them in backpacks. On the morning of April 15, 2013, Tamerlan and Dzhokhar set their plan in motion. Surveillance cameras captured them walking calmly through the crowded streets near the finish line. Tamerlan, wearing a dark baseball cap and sunglasses, carried one backpack. Dzhokhar, wearing a white cap backward, carried the other. They blended in perfectly. No one noticed them. No one suspected a thing. At 2:49 p.m., with thousands cheering as runners crossed the finish line, Tamerlan placed his backpack near a row of flags. Dzhokhar walked a little further down the street and set his backpack on the ground behind a group of spectators. And then they walked away. Moments later, the first bomb exploded, then the second. The brothers disappeared into the panicked crowd as first responders raced to the scene. Sirens wailed, people screamed, smoke filled the air. Boston was in shock. No one knew what had happened or who had done it. But within minutes, law enforcement agencies across the country were on alert. The FBI, Boston Police, and ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, joined forces. They sealed off the city center and began combing through evidence. Investigators collected bomb fragments, interviewed witnesses, and requested every available piece of surveillance footage from nearby businesses and traffic cameras. It was one of the largest investigations in Boston's history. More than 1,000 agents were assigned to the case. They sifted through thousands of hours of video, looking for anything unusual. And then they saw it. In footage from a store camera on Boylston Street, investigators spotted two young men carrying large backpacks. They walked calmly through the crowd. They didn't seem to cheer, wave, or look for anyone. And crucially, after the first bomb exploded, neither of them looked back. They just kept walking. It was their first real lead. The images were clear enough to identify faces, but the names were still unknown. Investigators raced to match the faces to any known suspects. Time was running out. They feared the bombers might strike again. 3 days later, on April 18th, the FBI made a bold decision. Release the images of the two suspects to the public. They called them Suspect 1 and Suspect 2. They asked for help identifying them, but also warned that these men were considered armed and extremely dangerous. The images exploded across TV screens, newspapers, and the internet. Everyone in Boston was on edge. Police patrols increased. SWAT teams stood ready. And somewhere in the city, the Tsarnaev brothers saw their faces on the news and knew their time was running out. That night, the brothers made a desperate move. They killed an MIT police officer, Sean Collier, ambushing him in his patrol car and trying to steal his gun. Then, they carjacked an SUV, taking its driver hostage. They forced him to withdraw cash from an ATM before releasing him unharmed. The man immediately called the police, giving them crucial information about the suspects and the vehicle they were driving. Hours later, police located the stolen SUV in Watertown, a residential suburb of Boston. And that's when everything exploded again. At around 12:30 a.m. on April 19th, officers spotted the SUV and attempted to stop it. The Tsarnaev brothers jumped out and opened fire. A fierce gun battle erupted in the quiet neighborhood, bullets ripping through parked cars and houses. The brothers threw homemade explosives at police, pressure cooker bombs like the ones used at the marathon. After a long exchange of gunfire, Tamerlan Tsarnaev was tackled and captured, but as officers struggled with him on the ground, Dzhokhar jumped back into the stolen SUV, and in his attempt to escape, he accidentally ran over his own brother, dragging him down the street. Tamerlan died from his injuries shortly after. Dzhokhar vanished into the night. Boston was now in full lockdown. Trains stopped. Businesses closed. Residents were told to stay indoors. More than 9,000 police officers and federal agents flooded the streets. The manhunt for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, now one of the most wanted men in America, had begun. But no one knew where he was hiding, and with one bomber dead and the other on the run, the question haunted everyone. Would he strike again?